Good evening and welcome everybody. It's been a while since we've done one of these creepy videos, but I figured that I owe you all one because it's basically heading into the Halloween season. This one was a real work in progress. I went on vacation and was distracted because I actually got bitten by a wild snake, being very aggressive towards me for I have no idea what reason. And then I got chased by a wild alligator, again, seemingly with no justification whatsoever. These reptiles are very rude, speaking of scary. I also was in quite a bit of pain for some time because I got my ears pierced. I'm not sure why, because I did them like really professionally and everything, how you're supposed to.
Do you have any autoimmune disease or something? No. Okay, then you're fine.
Is it in?
I think the hole's not big enough, dude. It's sign it. You're out. You're
Oh! Dude,
God bless.
You're good.
good. No blood, dude. No blood.
No blood?
No blood. Buddy.
No, the drop.
Can you get the alcohol swab? I just want to clean the outside of his ear.
Did you clean the outside of my ear?
I think we should have, but that's alright. Yeah, no.
That's not good. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about is true crime. Everybody loves true crime. And we're going to be looking at the cases of some of the oddest criminals in history. There's a twist though. Although the acts are disturbing, there's going to be no loss of life involved, which I think will be interesting. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the stories. The story of the Final Fantasy House cult starts with the narrator, who has not been publicly identified, creating a fan website dedicated to their favorite Final Fantasy VII video game character, Zack. For convenience's sake, let's refer to this narrator, who would later create a public warning post on a Final Fantasy VII blog about their experiences in the cult, as Zack. And as you'll soon realize, that name is shockingly appropriate. Zack was eventually contacted by a fellow fan of the game who had a similar page solely devoted to the character Hojo, and he became intermingled in conversations with her and her partner, who went by Jen, short for the Final Fantasy VII character Jenova. Jen and Hojo started talking with Zack about reincarnation, spirituality, and alternative universes. And through these conversations, Zack was convinced to believe that he was actually a reincarnation of the character Zack from Final Fantasy VII, the entire story of which had taken place in an alternate reality, according to Jen. Jen and Hojo believed that if there are infinite alternate universes, then all fictional stories must have taken place in them at some time, and that it was possible for the souls of the characters in those timelines to reincarnate on our Earth. Jen and Hojo truly identified as the Earth counterparts, or quote-unquote soul bonders, to the characters of Jenova and Hojo, which, by the way, is already a pretty big red flag because those two are literally the most evil characters in the game. Zack, wanting to know more, eventually agreed to meet up with Hojo, who convinced him to move in with them, and at this point he was officially inducted into the Final Fantasy house. He was also officially introduced to Jen in person, who was the cult's leader. Jen displayed erratic mood swings and constant shifts between love-bombing house members and despising them. The time in the house was unpleasant, to say the least. When Jen wasn't giving those staying there lessons on how to better integrate their soul-bonded Final Fantasy persona, lessons which would often include forms of abuse such as locking them in rooms for hours without their consent, she was berating them or forcing them to buy her items which she claimed were magical. One woman who had stayed at one of the cultist locations described their experience in a reply to Zack's post, where Jen basically hooked onto her vulnerabilities and lack of identity and successfully drained tens of thousands of dollars from her bank account. Zack recalls being pressured to nab old food from his job at a supermarket for the house members to eat due to their financial troubles. The diet consisted mostly of old meats and Gatorade, which regularly made Zack and the others sick. One thing Jen didn't spend her time at the house doing, however, was showering. She was described as smelling absolutely rancid and refused to wash using any products besides her quote-unquote magical oils. She also refused to change and wore the same dress every day to get in touch with her alter ego, Jenova. The house quickly became a pigsty, filled with food rubbish, fairy dust sprinkles, and toys, with cleaning rarely if ever taking place. Members were monitored by Jen constantly, and when they weren't at their jobs working hard to financially support her, they needed to be at the house. Otherwise, they risked being locked out for hours, and most of them being vulnerable members of society who had nowhere else to go in the first place, or formerly stable individuals who had been manipulated into losing their savings in exchange for lessons on how to fulfill their true spiritual potential. They risked homelessness if they refused Jen's demands. The house was often rife with conflict, as Jen and Hojo were known to violently assault each other at a coin's flip. Sexual harassment was also common under Jen's roof. Zach recalls her trying to pressure him to become intimate with another member who went by Aerith, because their characters were lovers in Final Fantasy VII. She even once laced their food with aphrodisiacs to try to encourage them. Another house member posted their own experience online, in which Jen and Hojo tied them to a chair and forced them to watch the two have rough intercourse. Zach would eventually run away from the Final Fantasy house with his pet rat due to a lack of food and his shoes being stolen, and I think this quote from an interview he did with Vice best encapsulates his feelings towards what he experienced there. Quote, "I would much rather be homeless than live with people like them ever again. The threat of homelessness doesn't faze me because I have seen something much worse." After Zach's original post warning the online world about Jen and her cult, they largely disappeared and deleted most traces of their existence. From the sparse information we have about Jen's personal life before she formed the Final Fantasy house, it suggested that she spent her adolescence in Cross Creek Residential Treatment Center, a troubled teen school that's faced legal issues for alleged physical and psychological abuse against minors. And although that doesn't serve as an excuse for Jen's actions, it helps paint a picture of where she likely got her abusive and antisocial tendencies from. Fandom can be very alluring, but it's important to not let yourself get lost in the fantasy. After all, even I sometimes look at Zarbon here and think, wow, literally me. But then I have to remind myself that Zarbon is beautiful, charming, intelligent, handsome, and powerful. Which does actually sound rather like me, but he's also green, which I'm not. But you know what the most interesting thing about the entire story of the Final Fantasy house is? It's that in a story of people suffering tragically from delusions, throughout all the documentation, we have no evidence that anyone ever identified as Cloud Strife at any of the cult's locations, which means that at least none of them were suffering from the worst delusion of all time, which is main character syndrome. 657 Boulevard is a house in Westfield, New Jersey that has a complicated criminal legacy attached to it, specifically in regards to one case of stalking. This story is rather recent, having started in June 2014, when Derek and Maria Broaddus purchased the large house, which they described as their dream home. But by the end of their stay, their attachment to the place would devolve into something more unsettling and nightmarish. The first letter from the eponymous watcher showed up in their mailbox 3 days after purchasing, before they had officially moved in. The envelope was addressed to the quote-unquote new owner, and the letter inside read as follows. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with the force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I'm in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. You have children. I've seen them. So far, I think that there are 3 that I've counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. Signed, The Watcher. After that, the Broadduses contacted the past owners of the house, the Woods. Andrea Woods told them that they had only received 1 letter from the Watcher when they were leaving, in which her and her husband were notified of the fact that they had been watched during their 23 years of living at 657 Boulevard. She denied having been harassed in any other form, which is strange because the Woods did have 2 young sons while they lived at 657 Boulevard. Why didn't the Watcher consider them young blood like the Broadduses' children? Well, that remains a mystery. Derek and Maria reported the letter and the Woods' previous letter to the police, and an investigation began, with police keeping an eye on nearby houses and residents. Derek and Maria then proceeded to move in, with Derek making some renovations to the house. A couple from town requested a tour of the refurbished home, which Derek obliged, and at a certain point he recalls one of the 2, a woman, saying it would be nice to have young blood in the neighborhood. This set Derek on edge, and understandably so. Young blood is not a common phrase, and one that should give anyone red flags as a massive creep factor, especially after reading it in a letter from an anonymous supposed generational stalker. Speaking of, 2 weeks after the first letter, said supposed anonymous generational stalker sent their second letter, which read as follows. Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will. I am pleased to now know your names, and the names of the young blood you have brought to me. You certainly say their names often. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to finally move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep in the 2nd floor? Who is the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you're finished moving in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher, and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. To put some respect on the name, I'm pretty sure if there's one thing we can count on the Watcher doing, it's, watching. Anyways, the fact that the letter inferred that the Watcher knew their children's names caused Maria and Derek to pause their plan to move into the house. The Watcher was saddened by this, and he soon sent his 3rd letter, simply stating, 657 Boulevard is missing you. The Watcher also expressed continued dissatisfaction with the renovations the Broadduses were doing on the house and demanded that they be stopped. The Broadduses kept away from the house, and there was a 3-year pause in letters between 2014 and 2017. During this time, the Broadduses tried to get a refund from the Woods family on the house, eventually bringing them to court seeking to clean their hands of the place and move on. There were also issues with the town, with the Broadduses having jurisdiction, rent claims, and etc. denied, even though the town was approving them for similarly sized houses. This led to more enmity, and several townspeople became vocally critical of the Broadduses in online spaces and town gatherings. The Broadduses made continued attempts to sell or rent out the 657 house, and in 2017 they would successfully find a renter, which resulted in the Watchers' fourth and very angry final letter to them. To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria, 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the Boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the Watcher. Sorry. Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. You are despised by the house, and the Watcher won. After 10 months of failing to sell the house, The Cut published an article about the story, leading to widespread interest in an eventual Netflix deal, saving the Broadduses from their financial difficulties. The house would then finally be sold in 2019 for around $1 million, and good fucking luck to that family. The Watcher is one of the most infamous stories in true crime history, particularly because it remains an unsolved mystery to this day. But that hasn't stopped a bunch of theories from cropping up, so let's take a look at a couple of them right now. Theory number 1. The Broadduses actually orchestrated the entire event themselves for financial gain, or to avoid defaulting on their mortgage. Some people think that Derek and Maria realized they had made a mistake purchasing the home and wanted an excuse to get a refund from the Woods. The two did seek a refund following the letters and dragged the Woods through a 3-year-long court battle to get rid of the house after all. More evidence for this theory is given in the form of letters that were anonymously delivered to critics of Derek and Maria in town in a style not unlike the Watchers, which Derek later on admitted to writing. Theory number 2. The Watcher is an alter ego of the Broadduses' next-door neighbor, Michael Langford. Langford was the adult son of the elderly Langford couple and was known to struggle with many mental issues, including schizophrenia, which could have contributed to delusions centered on protecting 657 Boulevard. Michael had lived his entire life in the town where this all took place, Westfield, and he had lived across from the house since he was born. He was also an avid swimmer, so the fact that 657 Boulevard had a pool could have been a contributing factor in his obsession. Or Michael was telling the truth, and his father had passed on the role of the Watcher to him for some reason. Theory number 3. The entire town was behind the Watcher. This one is the least grounded, but some people speculate that multiple townspeople banded together to force the Broadduses out through the letters. 657 Boulevard was one of the nicest houses in the area, and some think this could explain underlying resentment for whoever moved in, especially since Derek and Maria were outliers. The young blood comment from the woman at Derek's house tour is also used as evidence for this theory. The Watcher's identity still has yet to be uncovered, though the fact that they got their own Netflix show and still haven't come out of the shadows to claim their fame shows that no matter how creepy their actions were, they likely were rooted in some sort of fixation on guarding 657 Boulevard and weren't just done for attention. The year was 2005 in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, when locals began experiencing what seemed at first like a shared nightmare. Several townspeople found themselves waking up in the middle of the night to see a shadowy figure with wide eyes standing over their bed and staring at them. The twist is, this was no nightmare, but the real-life work of a criminal known as the Cape Intruder. The intruder would break into people's homes, usually using open windows, and loom over them in their sleep, just watching. As soon as they woke up, he would always escape. No one was ever successful in catching him. Dozens of people in Cape Elizabeth woke up to see the intruder, and we can assume that any number of other victims of his peacefully slept through him visiting them. Nothing in the house that he visited was ever stolen or even touched, and neither were the people he stalked. He seemingly derived some form of pleasure just from the act of watching them sleep. We know that it was one man responsible for these acts. Although he was never caught, anybody who had the misfortune of waking up to him gave the same description. A 20-something-year-old, relatively gaunt, brown-haired, brown-eyed white man standing at average height, with an expressionless and vacant face. These descriptions were collected by local authorities, who eventually composited a sketch of the Cape Intruder. A sketch that looks like this. Well, guys, there you have it. Just remember, although the world is a scary place, you personally should be fine as long as you stay in your house forever and never talk to anyone ever again, which I don't think most of us were planning on doing anyways. But, guys, please subscribe if you enjoy this kind of cool, crazy, chaotic, cathartic content, and my channel will for now continue to be the bizarre fusion of these kinds of videos and the audition videos that I post every day, as well as narrative works, which, speaking of, I'd appreciate if you guys could check out the short film that's currently the featured video on my page. A lot of work went into it, and I'm with a new team now working on a new one, which details will become available to you as they become available to me. But last note, happy Halloween. I mean, it's not exactly Halloween yet, and hopefully I'll get another one out before then, but just happy Halloween in advance.